Blessings Musing family. It's so weird saying that. I'm so used to saying I Waited Blog family, but I am now over here on my personal channel. And so if you don't know who I am, my name is Marilyn Desome, and I am a blogger. I am a vlogger. I am an author. I wrote a purity devotional, which I released in April 2018. I'm currently working on 2 more books. I have one that I'm really trying to get out by January 2020. And what else do I do? I'm a speaker. I am a writer. Let's see. What else do I do? And I'm an entrepreneur. Both aspiring and current. I have things that I'm working on right now that are in the works. And then I've had businesses prior, which I am one that I'm re-exploring, which is my cleaning and organizing business. But yeah, I am here today to talk to you all about 2020. So as we know, I didn't realize the significance of 2020 until I realized that everyone started talking about the new decade. And I was like, oh, wow, new decade. Like, I was like, well, what was I doing the last decade when it started? When I started thinking about that, I said, oh, I remember it so clearly. The last decade, I moved to Miami in September 2009. Okay. So September 2009, I moved here and I was dating someone that I had been dating when I lived in Orlando. We were dating long distance. So that person lived here in Miami and then I lived in Orlando. I moved here. And at the time that I moved here, we hadn't been talking for a couple months. We had broke it off, and I was cool with that because I said, God, if it's your plan for me to move to Miami, I don't want it to be about a guy. Show me, blah, blah, blah. Everything moved so smoothly in terms of my job transition. I made a lateral move from one position to the other, and everything was seamless. I got my apartment, everything. It was like seamless. I moved here, didn't ask for help from him, the person that I was dating. And so it was just a smooth transition for me. And so I got here and of course we reconnected, started back talking, and things just weren't right, which I'll talk about in another video in terms of knowing who you're dating and knowing what that dating process and those toxic type relationships, what kind of effect those relationships can have on you long term, which I didn't realize. And so when I was dating him, it was so much turmoil, so much up and down emotionally, and just never feeling good enough and all these other things. And so at the beginning of 2010, I remember it so clearly. I was sitting in my apartment, I was watching TV, and I just was kind of flipping through my email, and I saw my ex's name as a subject of an email, and I was like, well, what is this? And it was someone writing to tell me that they were his girlfriend. They had been his girlfriend for 2 years. We had been talking for about a year and so at that point, a year and something, about a year and a month or so, something like that. And all these other details. And I was like, it was January 3rd, a Sunday. And so I was like, oh, my heart literally dropped in my chest. Like when I say dropped, like dropped. And so that just began a cycle for me that I didn't even notice. So when I just started evaluating this past few weeks, I've just been evaluating like, okay, this is a new decade. What does this mean? What is the significance of this? What are the things that's happened in the past decade? And I realized that email, that situation, that relationship, that toxicity set the tone for my next decade. And it wasn't the whole blame for my whole decade, but of course it set the tone because I entered that relationship really confident about who I was, who God had called me, not who God had called me to be, but what God was calling me to in terms of my relationship with him. And just my life was changing at that time. And so I came in real confident, like, hey, I'm on a journey with God. I'm waiting. This is what I want in my life. And all of those things went out the window when I started dating him. We were no longer waiting because he wasn't with that. He was not willing to wait. He felt like I was controlling the relationship by controlling it with sex, that was not my goal, but whatever. And so we were not waiting. He, put me down in so many ways, like just I lost so much confidence in that relationship because I just felt like I was never good enough. Nothing I ever did was good enough. I wasn't pretty enough. Just like, just those things that men do in relationships where they put you down with the things that they say and the things that they do. And whether it's intentional, which I feel on his part, it was intentional, but those things have an effect on you. So I entered that new decade low in confidence, not feeling good about myself, not feeling confident about my abilities, not feeling confident about who I was, just doubting everything about me, not feeling pretty enough. Maybe I wasn't pretty enough. That's why he didn't, date me exclusively, all these things. And so that happened. And I was like, man, that set the tone for 2010 and beyond. This morning, today is December 22nd, I got up and I got up too late and I missed going to church. And so I watched my church online, and as my pastor was just talking about the new decade, I just kind of started thinking to the decade previous, which was 2000. And I said, well, did something significant happen with that decade? And I realized I began that decade with the death of my mother. Well, my mother had died July 1999. And so I began the year 2000 without my mother, in a new city, starting a new high school, and just so many things. Like, it was just, I was in a state of depression, of course, because my mother had died, who was like a big part of my life. And I realized, like, I opened that new decade with death, like literally the death of my mother. And my mother's birthday is on January 1st. So we always used to celebrate her birthday, and I'm Haitian, so we celebrate with a soup called Soup Jumu, which is like our Independence Day soup, because January 1st is also Haiti's Independence Day. And so I started that decade with death. Then I was like, well, let me think about the decade before that. And that was 1990. So at that point, I was 6. And what I realized was my mother was pregnant with my youngest sister at that time, because my sister was born in 1990. And so in 1998, entering into 1989. Oh, dang, that was a long time ago. 1989, entering into 1990, my mother was pregnant with my youngest sister. She was born in 1990, June 1990. And I realized that's when I started getting molested. I remember vividly that I started getting molested during the time that my mom was pregnant with my younger sister. And so I said, I had this, like, how your mind is blown? I had this mind blown revelation, like, wow, literally the enemy has been after my life and my destiny, and literally decades of my life, every decade. So 1990, I entered it as a child who had literally lost their innocence. I entered 2000 as a motherless child. And then I entered 2010 as a broken, unconfident woman, like a woman with no confidence. And so I realized this cycle has to stop. Like, when I realized that the enemy has stolen so much from me in the past 3 decades and 30 years, I said, this stops now. And so I've declared that 2020 is my year. It's going to be the year. It is the year where I walk in confidence. I walk in godly boldness. I walk in godly confidence. And I walk in my true purpose. And I walk knowing that I am a daughter. I am loved by God, that I am cherished by God, that I'm someone that's called by God, and that I'm someone that's worthy, that I'm someone that's full of the purposes and the destiny of God, and that nothing or no one can steal that from me anymore, knowing that there's been a cycle, there's been a pattern, and it stops now. It stops today. It stops December 22nd, 2019, when I realized, and I had that literal epiphany where God opened my eyes and showed me that every decade something traumatic and impactful and literally destiny stopping has happened to literally stop my destiny in its tracks. Like, and I think about who knows what would have been if those things wouldn't have happened, but I know they had to have happened. And so I will no longer allow the enemy access into my life, access into my future, access into the plans and purposes of God for my life. And so I've made the decision that 2020 is my year, and that I'm going to fulfill every promise that God has said to me, everything that he's promised me, my marriage, my children, businesses, ministry, everything, my family being saved, everything that God has promised to me, that I will see the fulfillment of it in 2020 and beyond. And that this decade is literally my decade, that it doesn't matter what comes, no matter what the enemy throws at me, that I am going to live my best life. I've literally been sleeping on myself. Like, when I say sleeping on myself, because I was just so broken from so many things that had happened, so many traumatic things, so many things that just caused literal wounds in my soul. And God has healed me. God has restored me. God has redeemed those parts of myself that I didn't think were redeemable. And so I have to show my gratitude to God by living out the promises and the purposes that he's had for me for so long. But I was so afraid to live it because I was just so in doubt of who I was, who he had called me to be, how he had called me to do it. And my voice, and just being scared of, my voice, and scared of my abilities, scared of the capabilities that I had. And this year that stops. And I'm not even talking about 2019 today, that stops. And so what I would admonish anyone that's entering into this decade, man, sit down, really get in God's face. And it doesn't have to look like nothing that you've seen on TV, no worship service and all this. Just sit still before God and say, God, what has been holding me back? How can I move forward? What can I do to really move forward in your plans and purposes for me? And God is going to speak, guys. When you ask him to speak, he is going to speak. And so I admonish you, find out, get in God's face, first of all, and ask him what has been stopping you. And then be ready to listen and be ready to explore and dig. Because for me, it's been a digging process. These past 8 years, been a digging process of, why do I do the things that I do? Why do I say the things that I do? Why do I act the way that I do? And that'll be something else I talk about, just, my dealings with men and how I've interacted with men and those situations because of the past. And so really dig deep. 2020, we have literally the ability to shift the trajectory of our lives by shifting our mindset, shifting the way that we see things, and shifting our posture. Don't go into 2020 defeated. Don't go into 2020 depressed. Don't allow the enemy to make you feel like you're nothing, because you are. You are. Like, there's literally no one on this earth like you. And so, please, if you don't get anything else out of this video, and if you're still watching, get to know God, and then get to know why he put you here. And then if there's something that's been holding you back, or you feel like there's been this cycle, or like there's rope tied around your body that's like pulling you back, and you trying to run forward and something's pulling you back. And that's how I felt for the past few years, because you have to discover why that is. And so if I can do anything, if I can pray for you, if I can encourage you, please email me at mimismusing@gmail.com. Comment below. Subscribe to the channel, because there are going to be so many other videos. And also share the video on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, everything. Whatever other social media sites there are. I guess there's Snapchat as well. But whatever other social media, share, please, and get the word out about the channel. I'm so excited to get more content out to you all. And I look forward to what God is going to do, not only in your life, but in my life as well, and in the lives of my family and the people that I love. Now that I understand that there's been a cycle, and that God has broken the cycle, and that he's doing a new thing. He is doing a new thing. And I am perceiving it. I see it. I understand it. And I am going to walk in that new thing in Jesus' name. So guys, I bless you all. I pray that God's richest blessings fall upon you all in 2020 and that you see the full manifestation of what God has to offer for your life. Love you. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.